Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Lower Liability in Nightclubs, Bars, and Concert Facilities. During this webinar, our presenter will cover the following. Liability exposure, 2 critical ways to prevent lawsuits. Ways to increase profitability, 7 ways security management can put money into the bottom line. How to maintain positive relationships with local municipalities. The webinar will feature criminal analyst Dale Yeager. Dale began his education as a criminal analyst in 1988. He has extensive training in criminal psychology, forensic psychology, sex crimes investigation, crime scene forensics, crime scene procedures, domestic terrorism analysis. Mr. Yeager has had advanced training at the Law Enforcement Training Center from 2005 to 2008. For the past 10 years, Mr. Yeager has provided security management training and security systems redesign for the House of Blues, Live Nation Corporation, SBE Entertainment, and the Gaylord Hotel chain. Since 1995, Mr. Yeager has trained over 100,000 local, state, and federal law enforcement officers in crowd control and security management of live events at large-scale arenas. Research on violence has been published in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin and Profiling Violent Crimes by Dr. Ronald Holmes. Dale is a frequent expert with media outlets, including a featured episode of Forensic Files. Dale has lectured at many higher education institutions throughout the United States, such as Drexel and Howard Universities. He's also an instructor for the Newman University Criminal Justice Program. In 2002, Dale was given a presidential appointment to the U.S. Selective Service System, and in 2004, he became a member of the FBI's InfraGuard program. If you have a question that pertains to this presentation, we do ask that you use the chat or Q&A feature, which is found on the right hand of the screen. Dale will do his best to answer your questions during the presentation. Approximately 1 hour after the event ends, we'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of the webinar. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after this webinar is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to our distinguished presenter, Dale Yeager. Dale, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to first do a little bit of an introduction before I got into the webinar today. Just a brief introduction. One of the things that prompted this webinar was the fact that as we work with working with attorneys on both sides, both plaintiff and defendant, we see what we've always seen for the past 15 years, that lawsuits really come out of nightclubs, bars, and entertainment venues because of certain issues that continue to arise. We see them on the West Coast, the East Coast, we see them in Canada, and because of this, seeing these things over and over again and knowing what we have actually done as a company, as a team of people going in and refining or changing the risk management and the security practices of an organization and seeing the results of that, that really became a conversation that Matt and I had about doing a webinar for not for the legal side of TASA Group, but for the consulting side. And so today it's a little different than the legal webinars that we've been doing for TASA. I'm going to be really teaching a seminar on these critical issues and talking about them, and then I'm going to give a lot of time for any questions that you might have at the end, because that's really the key to all of this. But as we go through this, again, this came out of just watching all of that information, all of this, the pieces of the puzzle coming together over the past 15 years, and saying we can teach people how to prevent this from happening, which is something we've been doing for a while. So let's start first with liability exposure. 2 critical ways to prevent lawsuits. Well, number one is you cannot assess You can't determine whether you have policies in place and you're executing them correctly to prevent lawsuits unless you have an audit done. And the problem is that most, and I'm going to use the term entertainment venue to mean bars, nightclubs, and large-scale arenas. So hopefully everybody listening, you understand that I'm using that term as a holistic term so I don't have to keep repeating the multiple words at the same time. But in entertainment venues, very rarely has someone ever taken the time, other than an insurance carrier looking at safety issues, to really audit, just like you would audit books, to really audit the security process and the risk management process. And I talk to CEOs like myself. I'm the CEO of a corporation, and I talk to CFOs, and they say, well, the problem is if we ask for an audit of our risk management department or our security department, that's going to annoy people and anger people, and you know, I don't need that aggravation. Well, that's part of the problem. Any person in leadership, any person in an executive position should be more than happy to let someone come and take a look at what they're doing. If they're doing all the right things, if they're following the proper process and good practice, they shouldn't be scared of an assessment or an audit of what they're doing. And if there's lawsuits happening, and there's an increase in lawsuits or complaints or loss of customers, something's going drastically wrong. And so at some point, someone is going to have to come in and take a honest and detailed look at the management practices involving security and risk management, because something's wrong. And you say, well, we've got people inside the company that can do that. That's like going to the doctor, saying, doctor, I've been sick for a good 6 months, and I'm throwing up, I'm losing blood, I'm a mess physically, but I'm going to tell you how to assess my problem, and I'm going to tell you how to do my treatment. You cannot. It just doesn't make logical sense, and it certainly it doesn't meet any standard of good management practice to try to figure out your own problems internally. That's where someone on the outside, whoever it may be, has to come in and take a fresh look at what's going on and not make a list of complaints. You know, an audit report regarding security and risk management should never be a list of complaints. What it should be is a true assessment of management. What is working, what is not. Key thing is what is working, and then a plan of action to fix the holes, to fix the problems. Not a list of complaints, and certainly not a list of equipment. Most of the time, this is not an equipment issue. It doesn't require purchasing things. It requires a change in the way things are done. But the question is, here is, how do you know it's working? And I hear people who are CEOs, CFOs, managers of entertainment venues who say, well, I have a general idea, I have a pretty good idea what's going on. That's gut feeling. That's no way to run an organization. That's not good business practice. You've got to have a serious, detailed way of making sure that you know that it's working, the process that you've put in place, the management system you put in place. You've got to have a way to verify it. Number 2 is training. Well, the problem is that training is one of the key areas that's lacking. And you wonder why security personnel overreact or underreact. You wonder why security managers are disconnected from their security people, why the risk management department has conflicting information in their emergency plan. Well, a lot of it is because they've been trained very poorly. So let's talk about dirty little secrets. I'm a criminal analyst. I teach forensic psychology, so, you know, it's just part of who I am. I love dirty little secrets. Here's one of the dirty little secrets that nobody talks about publicly. In American corporations, I found this to be true in U.S. corporations primarily, both small and large companies, I find that executives are really leery about pushing their security directors to be trained or to be tested. And the reason why is because in a lot of corporations, the security director ends up doing all the dirty work for the executives. They take care of all sorts of little personal problems that the executives are having, and so the problem is they don't want to annoy them or aggravate them. And this kind of management practice is a serious problem, and eventually it's going to end up as a court case. Because when you do that type of management where you're using security directors as kind of your go-to hit team, trouble-solving person for your personal issues, that's going to come back to haunt you. You've got to have somewhat of a barrier between you and the people you manage. It's very hard to fire a friend. And so familiarity breeds contempt. We all know what that means. Second problem is that in U.S. corporations, we have another problem, a serious problem. We have a system that has been in place for the better part of 20 years, which causes so many problems that we see on a daily basis with the companies we work with, and that is the idea of having HR oversee security. It is one of the worst ideas ever formulated by human beings, in my opinion. HR has no understanding of security. Even if they go through training, they have a limited understanding of security and security process. Even risk management, they have very little understanding of it. When you put HR over a security director, that's a serious issue because the security director cannot freely do what they need to do to make sure that your facilities are being secured. Also, the training that the security director knows that his people or her people need has to go through HR, and HR, again, is going to say, well, why would you need that training? That doesn't make any sense. HR and security directors should be on the same level as executives, not one underneath the other. When you go overseas, you'll find that that is true in most companies in other countries, in Asia and Europe. But here in the United States, we have this very odd hierarchy, and we have seen that directly affect decision-making, and it creates conflict. It creates a lot of conflict between the HR director and the security director because they have two different mindsets, and they should. Instead of working together, they basically fight with each other over control of who's going to get what. So this is a critical problem. Number two, in the lawsuits we work on as experts, the ones I work on as experts, this is a critical problem. Any good attorney out there who's participating in this webinar today knows that when someone says, yes, my security people are trained, they've got to have to verify it. Well, here's what most companies actually can actually produce for verification of training. They're going to produce a date when the people were trained. They may actually be able to produce a list of people who were trained. The problem is that's really not training. If you cannot produce for me at least 4 trainings a year for your security people, at least 4, and the name of the instructor and the CV of the instructor or instructors and the test that was given after each training and the test results of each attendee, you have not been able to verify training, because proper training involves properly trained instructors with experience who actually know security management. And it also involves testing. I don't care if it's 5 questions or 25 questions. There has to be a test. How do you know people got it? And any good attorney out there knows that if they can't produce those documents, then that training is, in quotation marks, alleged training, because proper training is done a certain way. This is a critical, critical problem. Now, that brings up another issue. I know today I'm bringing up all sorts of issues, but this is the purpose of the webinar. Trainers that are out there teaching training, security managers. Another dirty little secret that people do not many times know is that most security directors, most security supervisors have no significant training in security management or experience in it. There is an assumption by executives that if you come out of federal law enforcement, and we've done over 300,000, we've trained over 300,000 law enforcement officers through this company. We have 2 federal contracts for training law enforcement through the Hyde and McLaughlin program. We love cops here. We love federal agents. We have them on our staff. But the bottom line is that the majority of them, and when I say majority, 98% of them, have no training in security management. That is a specific science that is 40 years old. It has research behind it, and very, very few people in North America have that training or that experience. Just because you were a cop, just because you were in the military, does not mean you understand security management. The key word there is management. So you have a lot of times the blind leading the blind. You have people who have poor training, lack of experience, teaching a lot of bad ideas to their security personnel, and in some cases you have risk management people who may understand the insurance side. They might understand the HR side of risk management but don't know anything about security management. This is a critical deficit that eventually is going to, or is currently causing you litigation and lawsuits. So again, you have to verify it. How do you know it's working? And training has to be verified. And training includes testing and the CVs of the people teaching. Where did they get their training? And is it directly related or indirectly related to security management? Moving on. Profitability. Security and risk management should be a profit center. Now, when I say this to CEOs and CFOs and owners, they look at me like deer caught in the headlights and they say, "Are you serious?" I go, "Absolutely. If the management piece is brought into this, if you're really doing security management, your security and risk management department is not an expense, it's a moneymaker." For 15 years, I was blessed to be a student of Peter Drucker. Some of you may know who Dr. Drucker was, the man who invented what we know today as management structure. And one of the things he used to tell me was that profitability should be in every division of every company. No division should just be a cost. There should be profitability. And I remember talking to him about this idea many, many years ago in the late 90s I said, "Look, security can be a profit center." And he goes, "Absolutely. Now, how do you see it?" And I laid this out for him, the 7 ways. And he said, "Boy, that makes sense. It all ties together with good management practice." So let me go through these with you so that I can explain them. And I'm going to read from an article actually I read, which if you let us know, we'll gladly, an article I actually wrote several years ago, which we'll gladly send to you to look at. And I'm going to read from each one of these and then talk a little bit about each one. Liability reduction, insurance cost decrease. With improvements in the prevention of internal theft, financial misconduct, accidents, and other crimes, companies can track their results and use this data to negotiate a reduction in their liability insurance premiums. You know, when you go to an insurance carrier and say, "I'd like to get a reduction in my premium," well, the question is why? And what you need to do is bring them the empirical data, bring them the facts and say, "Look, here's where we were last year, here's where we are this year, and you can negotiate." We do this all the time with our clients. We see it all the time. We were able to show them a process, take that process to a carrier, and get a reduction. That's right there is money savings. That's money that's put back in that can be used for capital. It's profit. Number 2, reduction of legal costs. Proper security management also reduces the outlay of funds for legal representation and costly lawsuits. That just makes sense. And many of the companies that we work with, you know, they say, "Wow, it just significantly decreased our lawsuits, the amount of lawsuits we had." You know, basically, the program that we do, the Entertainment Venue Risk Management Program, if we prevent one slip and fall case from happening in a facility, it's paid for itself. So return on investment is pretty simple to understand. Retention of good employees. Good employees and managers have options. They can go somewhere else. They will not stay in a dysfunctional company. Conflicts, thefts, and other issues create dysfunction. The loss of these valuable people will hurt the bottom line of any business because they're the people who are doing the majority of the work. They're the ones who are creating production. They're producing. And when you lose these people because of internal issues like what I just mentioned, it's hard to find new ones to replace them. Number 4, prevention of public scandal, retention of customers. Security-related issues cause scandal that either becomes public or begins rumors. The end result is the customers will leave. If you do not control what's going on the inside, it will eventually come out into the public, and that is going to make you lose customers. It's going to affect your bottom line immediately. Number 5, improve productivity, increase profit. A well-managed company is a safe company. Let me say that again. A well-managed company is a safe company. You show me a company that is poorly managed, and I'll show you a company that has lawsuits and safety issues and internal theft. It is all management process. Security management improves overall management since it has a direct effect on money management, employee management, and supply management. If you change, you know, people talk about changing a culture in a company. Well, the way to do that is start with one small division, one small entity. When you change that, it starts to affect, in a positive way, all the others. It starts to set an example of change, and you start with one small area. You don't do it company-wide or venue-wide. You start with one area, and it will affect all the others. Improved productivity and increased profit. Again, you're going to increase your profit and your productivity with good security management. Reduction of employee turnover, cost savings. The hiring, discipline, and firing of an employee costs money. For small businesses, the outlay on recoverable funds is on average $1,500, and for larger firms, the cost can reach as high as $10,000 to $15,000. That's barring lawsuits. As Peter Drucker once said, you don't hire good employees, you hire good people and train them to be good employees. One of the areas that we look at is hiring practice, because if you let dysfunctional people in the door, they're going to be a liability. You've got to protect the entryway, the ingress as we call it. That's where it all starts. Number 7, reduction of worker compensation claims. Personality profiles designed over the years by forensic researchers has shown that employees who steal, are habitually late, and have conflicts with workers also file worker comp claims at alarming rates. This is part of a narcissistic personality which includes the ability to sell themselves to human resources staff or managers during employment interviews. Simply preventing these types of people from being hired saves money. I mean, if you think about it, the hiring process, the interview process is what? It's basically a psych assessment. It's a personality assessment. It's an ethics assessment. How good is your hiring practice? Can it be improved? What are the weak points to it? Because again, devil can't get in the door if you don't let him in the door. And ultimately, this is a management issue, plain and simple. Plain and simple. So again, liability reduction, reduction of legal costs, retention of good employees, prevention of public scandal, improved productivity, reduction of employee turnover, reduction of worker comp claims. There they are, the 7 ways that risk management and security can be a profit center in the smallest company and the largest company. Maintaining positive relationships with local municipalities. If you go to Google News after this webinar and put in nightclub or bar and city council, you're going to read literally hundreds of stories across the United States. Over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a dramatic increase because we're getting the calls. We're not just seeing it on Google News. We're getting the phone calls from city council members saying, we've got these nightclubs and bars in our community. They're causing us a lot of problems, either noise or fighting or whatever the issue may be, even crime. And, you know, we don't want to pull their license because that's revenue that we want to have as a community, but they don't seem to be changing their ways. We don't know what to do. We get these calls literally on a monthly basis. And the bottom line is that municipalities, whether they're small or large, are not putting up with this anymore. Even large places like New York City, Los Angeles, are saying to nightclubs, bars, and the like, you know, get your act together, we'll pull your license. Well, one of the things that owners need to understand, and counsel, any attorneys who are representing these, you're going to have to do some pretty major changes in that client's entity or in that entertainment venue to show the local city council, the local municipality, the local police that you have made changes and that you're solving these problems. Well, number 1 is training. If you do proper training with proper trainers, with a testing program, you can lay that out for the city council, for the police, and say, here's what we've done. Don't just tell them, oh, we're doing some training. Show them. Show them. Show them, here's the training we've done, here's the curriculum, here are the handouts that were used, here's when the training was done, here's all the testing results, everybody passed with 80% or higher. That will get them off your back. That will produce positive relationships with city councils, with local municipalities, and especially with police. If they see that you're taking a proactive approach, it's not just words, you can show them on paper action. Prove your training. Number 2, meetings. You've got to have regular meetings with law enforcement, with city council, and neighborhood watch if there's one there with you. Your security managers should have, and your risk management people should have already told you that you should be meeting with neighborhood watch, getting their cooperation to help you out, because basically they're free, they're out there volunteering, and they can assist, not directly, but they can assist in the bigger issue of crowd control on the outside. But you're going to have to communicate with these people. Many times we find owners who are disconnected from their nightclubs, their bars, their entertainment venues, and they're not meeting with these people. A lot of times when we talk to city council members, I say, well, who owns that nightclub? And they go, you know what, I have no idea. I talked to their attorney, but I've never talked to an owner. A lot of times that offends law enforcement and city council members that they never meet the owners. The owners are off and disconnected from the process. These two simple things go a long way with solving that problem with local municipalities. Proving your training is quality, high standard. Number two, having regular meetings. Very important. Very simple stuff. What I want to do now is open it up for any questions that you might have. I tried to just give you as much as I could in our short period of time, but I want to make sure, because I know that Matt was getting some questions, and I want to make sure that I answer all of them in the time we have. So any questions out there, Matt?
Yeah, we have one from Charles, who asked, he has a question about safety plans. Is there a safety plan that these venues should have on file? And do jurisdictions require that those plans be filed and maintained?
Okay, I'll answer. It's a two-part question. First of all, most municipalities do not require a safety plan. Some do, some don't, and those regulations vary. That's where your attorney can help you determine what is required. But here's the thing. A safety plan that might be required by a municipality is not good enough to prevent liability. You're going to have to go the extra mile. Now, a little side note. Do not, and I repeat, do not, I'm going to say it a third time, do not use a template system for a safety plan. A safety plan must be custom designed, and you can't design a safety plan unless you've done a security audit or a security assessment. That's putting the cart before the horse. You have to figure out what's working and what's not. Then, based on that, make changes, and based on that, design your safety plan. A lot of times, the safety plan that is in place or the emergency plan that is in place is the biggest discoverable documents that make entertainment venues lose in a lawsuit, because you'll find conflict there, you'll find outdated information, you'll find information in there that's not relevant to changes the club has made in the last 30 days. These safety plans have to be custom designed after a proper assessment, and they have to be updated constantly. That's why we always say use a Word document. It makes it easier to make changes. So I hope that answered the question. And any other, Matt?
Oh yeah, we have a couple that have been coming in. We have one from Michelle here who asks, do clubs typically have written guidelines on how to deal with persons or gangs that come into the bar and have known propensity for violence? And do they have to file those with city council, police, neighborhood watch, the local government, etc.?
The answer to that is generally no. They're not required to do that. And I will tell you from our experience, which is pretty vast from coast to coast, small venues to large venues, that most places do not have these in place, and these kind of policies related to gangs. If they do, they're very poor, they're poorly designed, they're incomplete. It's an absolute mess. Again, it's like something I tell students in college. When you eventually get a business card, if you're not a graphic designer, don't design your own business card, no matter how good your mother says your artwork is. If you can't do something, get someone who's professional to do it. And this is a problem, too. You have people putting together safety plans, and especially on the gang issue, which is a huge issue with entertainment venues, by the way. It's a huge issue. They're putting together these plans based on a lack of knowledge or partial knowledge on the subject. Again, that's opening you up to a major lawsuit, and you're opening yourself up to injury to your patrons. I mean, they're the people paying the bills, and you're not taking care of them. And I will say something else related to that. I find in my 20-year career an extraordinary amount of owners who just don't care. They'll literally look at me and say, you know what, I'm rolling the dice. If a lawsuit happens, we'll pay it off and move on. They truly, many owners, not all, but many owners just don't care. They don't care. To them, it's an ATM. If it doesn't work, they'll close it and open another one somewhere else. At some point, ethics becomes a part of this discussion. It's not just good business practice anymore, but ethical behavior. You know, you just don't care about the safety of your staff or your patrons. That's a dangerous thing. So, but again, answering the question, most of them are not required to do that. Number two is it's very rare to find even a safety plan that has anything about gangs in it other than very rudimentary things, and most of that is, by the way, inaccurate. The big gangs that are causing problems now in clubs in the last 5 years are juggalos and straight edge. And most of the time when you talk to security directors, security managers, and security personnel, they don't even know who those people are. But they're a bigger problem than Bloods and Crips and everything else. So anyway, Matt, another question?
Yeah, we have a question here from Chris who asks, do you have any experience with networking among local nightclubs to identify and blackball repeat troublemakers? Is any experience where clubs would band together and blackball, quote-unquote blackball, repeat troublemakers?
Well, I haven't heard of that being done by nightclubs together. They're pretty competitive. I have heard about working with local law enforcement and meeting with them at least once a month as the managers or the security supervisors to talk about trends that the law enforcement, local law enforcement can talk about. Certainly having those meetings is critically important, but I haven't heard of many clubs getting together and sharing that information and then deciding this guy is out, this woman's out, or this group. The big problem with many nightclubs is just having people who are thrown out sneaking back in. And when they sneak back in, that's a management issue. That's a lack of training of security. That's a lack of training of management. They shouldn't be getting back in. That is preventable. But as far as blackballing people, that's an odd aspect of the management of entertainment venues, both arenas and bars. And of course, trespass laws come into effect there, which is, this is private property, and we can choose who we want to let on this property and who we don't. A lot of times it's amazing to me that a lot of executives and managers don't know that they can also write a letter to repeat offenders and send that letter to the offending person saying you're barred from coming into my place of business, and then filing a copy of that with local law enforcement. And there's many ways of using those laws to your advantage, but groups getting together very rarely. One of the things we've been trying to do in the last couple of years, which has been very difficult, is getting restaurant associations to put a process together to meet on a monthly basis, all the nightclubs and bars and that, to share information and to do cooperative training. To us, that just makes logical sense that a restaurant association in a city or a county would do that, and when they do it, it's pretty poor. Attendance is poor. The trainers are poor. It would make logical sense for them to band together, but it's hit and miss on that. That's the best I can answer that question.
Okay, we have two questions about training security at these venues. The first question comes from Jennifer, who asks, do you know of any ordinances or jurisdictions requiring professional standards for securities in bars, nightclubs, concert venues, etc.?
Well, in the United States, other than security guards that would carry a firearm, there are specific laws in various states that if they carry a firearm, they are required to get training and licensing, even if they're a law enforcement officer. For example, in Pennsylvania, we have a law that states that even if you're a police officer, if you're going to work as a bodyguard or security person and carry a firearm, you still have to go through that special training even though you're a cop. But other than that, generally not. There's no requirement for that. However, in the United Kingdom, in Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and England, there is a law there that's been around for, I believe, 10 years. It's called the Doorman Act or something about Doorman. And if you're a security person at a nightclub, you're required to go through annual training and certification on a federal level because they've had so many problems over there, especially Scotland. I don't know how many of you know, but Scotland has the highest amount of violent crime in Western Europe, and it's been #1 for several years. In fact, on their country's website, they actually have a whole page devoted to this issue of violence, and it's mostly pubs and bars and mostly nightclubs, and England has a horrific problem with violence, too, which a lot of people in the United States and Canada don't know about. So, but in the U.S., very rarely is there a local standard, a local requirement for any training of security personnel, which, has its pros and cons, but no, it's generally not.
Okay, we have a question here from Frank who asks, what should security do to prevent weapons from being brought into clubs by men and by women?
Well, first of all, if you're going to depend on metal detectors, you're going to be in trouble because even the best metal detectors in the country, which are extremely expensive, will miss certain things. There are many weapons that they just won't pick up on. We train security personnel and bartenders and waitresses to actually profile a person's body and behavior, and it is extremely accurate. In fact, after we teach it, it takes about 15 minutes to learn. We actually put people in the room, and we'll put 5, 6 people walking around the room. One of them will have a knife in their pocket, or one will have a pistol in their pocket, a training knife or training gun. And right now we're at 96% over 12 years. The group, after training for 15 minutes, will be able to pick out who has a weapon, where it's at, and what type of weapon it is, semi-automatic pistol, revolver, or knife. So that's the way it should be taught. Turn everybody on the staff into a metal detector, and then hand wand people as they come in, depending on your facility. Now, wanding, which is the handheld metal detectors, that's again problematic because we see people that aren't properly trained to use them, or they're not maintained correctly. Again, these are all liability issues. You have to learn how to wand people. It is not a natural act, and it requires training. You have to know how to hold that. You have to understand different body types and different jewelry and how that affects the wanding. So wanding and weapons detection is not complicated to teach, but it's something that you as managers, as supervisors, have to stay up on all the time. You have to continually train and test your people to make sure their skills are sharp on that. But it's fun to learn too, because you don't realize how easy it is to profile someone carrying a weapon until you learn the ways to determine that. It's quite interesting. Of course, it makes you very paranoid when you go outside or into a mall. But anyway, another question?
Yeah, we have a question here from Julia who asks, what constitutes proper training for security personnel?
Well, as I said earlier, you have to have people who are doing the training who have had proper training, which we'll have to describe in a minute, and who have had experience doing security management. So if they haven't had at least 2 years plus of full-time work working in a nightclub or entertainment venue or arena, whatever facility you have, well, what experience do they have? And secondly, what's the quality of their training? Do they understand emergency management? Do they understand crowd control? Do they understand hiring practice? What's the depth of their training? But proper training has a curriculum. Here's what we're going to teach. Here's why we're going to teach it. And this is the series. This is each level that we're going to teach. That's number one. It has to have a curriculum. Number two, the people who are being taught have to be tested with a written test and a physical test. They have to be able to physically do what you're teaching, and they have to be able to answer critical questions. In that testing, they have to pass with 80%. 80% is considered a minimum on these types of testing, and you have to have test results. And then you have to have someone to analyze the test results. So in answer to the question, it requires someone with extensive experience doing security management, number one, as a trainer. Number two, what's their teaching ability? Do they have a curriculum that outlines, just like when we went to school or college, what the course is about, what you're going to learn? Does it have various levels, level 1, level 2, to certify people at? Does it have a testing process, both physical and on paper? And are people passing with 80% or higher? That's the basics. That's the fundamentals of what is called proper testing. Proper testing. And I'll tell you what, most entertainment venues don't even come close to that process, which has been talked about extensively at the Justice Department for years on this issue. So, any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question that kind of piggybacks on the question that came before the last question that you answered.
Okay.
Carlos asked, besides the obvious, drunks and weapons, what are you looking for at the door? Let's say it's at a nightclub. Then let's say it's at a state fair. Obviously, big differences in these venues. How would you change the way the security personnel work at those two venues to monitor the situation?
Well, great question. First of all, it doesn't matter whether it's a nightclub with 500 people in it or a state fair that has 20,000 people. First of all, you have to train your security personnel to be able to scan large groups of people, 100 at a time, and pick out nuances in behavior. First thing you're looking for is things that don't make sense or are out of place, and that's simplistic to say, but it's actually more complicated to explain. So you're looking for groups of people. You're looking for groups of people that don't make sense, people that are together that shouldn't be together. Again, I wish we had more time for me to explain this, but bottom line is we teach to look for groupings of people. We're looking for individuals that are by themselves. We're looking for weapons. You're scanning crowds in a triangular fashion. It's hard to explain it over the phone. It's easier to show it. But you use a triangular configuration to watch people and break down large groups that are walking through your gate. You're also slowing them down. The process, too, is to keep them moving fast enough that you don't annoy the customer, but also at the same time running them through at a nice pace so that you can observe, scan, wand, whatever you have to do. So in that case, it does depend on the size of the crowd and the venue. But you're teaching, in the teaching process, you're looking for sexual aggression, you're looking for gangs, you're looking for aggressive groups of girls or males or females. You're looking for, obviously, drugs and alcohol. You're looking for reckless behavior. You're looking for, it's quite a list. It's quite a list, and we don't have time to go through all of it. But, again, if you start to even comprehend the extent of what has to be looked at when a crowd comes through the door, whether it's 20 people or 200 with a gate, it really requires training and really top-notch management to stay on top of their people and watch them and keep them from getting lazy or tired in the process and being as aggressive and as professional at the end of the day or the end of the night as they were at the beginning. And so it's again, I wish I could go into more detail, but it's about training and about breaking up the crowd and looking for certain behavior patterns, both in individuals and groups, and then tracking. That's the next step is radioing ahead and saying, okay, I got a group coming down the left side here. Here's their description. We want to monitor them. We think they might cause some problems, and we want to predict and prevent. And so that's all part of that bigger process. It can get complicated. We make it simple, but to explain it is complicated. Anyway, another question?
Sure. We have a two-parter from Frank as a way of a follow-up. Is a hand-pat down of men and an examination of women's purses an adequate door check for nightclubs? And then he asked to go on to the question that he asked 2 questions ago. Are wands expensive? So a 2-part question there for Frank.
Well, first of all, the issue of patting people down, that's a whole other animal. There is, from a legal perspective, you have to be very careful. That's where legal counsel comes in and becomes very important in this process. We believe that you do observation at the door, and depending on the situation, you wand people as they come through. And you can wand fast, but effectively. But again, that takes training, and it gets boring after a while. Wanding, I've done it myself back in the day. It gets boring. It gets tiring. That's where management has to say, stay strong. We wand this person the way you did the first person. As far as checking purses, well, there's other things to be looking besides purses. Most women who are carrying drugs or carrying weapons are carrying them on their body, not in their purse. So, and in a lot of nightclubs, women don't carry purses. So it all depends on the situation. I wish it could be more specific, but it depends on the venue. It depends on the design of the venue, and what kind of crowd you're getting. Because some nightclubs have a night where there's teenagers come in, no drinking night, and so that's a whole other animal when you have those kind of events. Sometimes you have a band playing at a concert venue where it's families. So you got kids that are 2 years old, and you got people 96. That's a whole other situation. So it all depends. Now, the question about wands, are they expensive? No, wands are not that expensive. But again, it's a worthless piece of equipment if you don't train your people to properly use it, and if you don't maintain them. They require maintenance. Now, they're pretty much low maintenance, but they do require maintenance. Again, it's about having a management process in place to handle the training and making sure policy is relevant to what you're actually doing. So hopefully that answers the question. Any others, Matt?
Sorry, yes, we have a couple others, but there's a couple here. Here you go. Do you find dress codes effective, and if so, what do you see as key elements of dress codes? You say that women, sometimes hide drugs on themselves. What should you be looking at as far as how people are dressed?
Well, first of all, dress codes are a problem, and I'm going to tell you why. It is absolutely acceptable to have a dress code. For example, I just had to go to an event down in D.C., and it was at a country club, the Congressional Country Club, and they made it very clear to us that men are required to wear jackets and ties within the clubhouse. So, in other words, don't show up without a jacket and tie. And so dress codes are critical to attracting the right kind of customer, and certainly preventing gang affiliation, because a lot of street gangs will use sports memorabilia to identify their gang. So dress codes become a security enhancer. But here's the problem. The problem is that a lot of, and we're dealing with this right now with a client of ours, where a dress code has been seen by local community people as racist. So when you're putting a dress code together, just because it makes sense to you as an executive or an owner doesn't mean that it doesn't have consequences. And one of the problems with the client we have currently is that when they put their dress code together, they never contemplated the idea that it would be seen as racist, because again, they were looking at it from their perspective, basically being suburbanites. So dress codes, again, are important, but again, if you're not going to do a security audit and a security assessment of everything, which includes dress codes, and look at what's working and what's not, and what the consequences may be, you're really not doing justice to the management structure of your organization, and you're increasing your liability exposure. So, yeah, dress codes are good and bad, depending on who puts them together and the assessment that's done to determine what's needed and what's not. So.
Okay, we have a question here from Jennifer, who asks, my municipality uses a standard of one security person per 50 patrons. Is this a reasonable standard or is this dependent on the culture of the venue?
Well, let's put it this way. I have seen incredible violence at Barbra Streisand concerts, Bette Midler concerts with women over the age of 50, just brutalizing each other. So this idea that some concerts or some venues don't need security is really a lot of pop psychology. People at all ages and all socioeconomics can behave badly. And so it's critically important to not say, well, we're going to have heavy metal here or hip hop tonight, so we've got to have we're going to have security for that, but we're having a jazz singer in the next night, and that's a low key crowd. Well, what does low key mean? The issue is that they could be doing drugs, selling drugs. There could be prostitution going on. Don't kid yourself; it goes on a lot. So there are crimes being committed. You're just not seeing them; they're more subtle. But the issue of one guard to 50 people, that is just really a bad idea. If I was working for a defense or for a plaintiff's attorney who was suing a venue, I would say that's unacceptable. Just because the local city council says that's what you need as a minimum doesn't mean that you don't need to, from a business perspective, go above and beyond that. Frankly, for a nightclub type environment, I believe that's what this is. You should have one security person for at least every 30 people. Because think about this. When an emergency happens, fire breaks out, there's some kind of an emergency situation, you're talking about one person managing in an emergency 50 people. That's a lot of work and physically impossible. But again, the problem here is that owners will say, well, there's a budget, and the budget says I can only afford X number of security. And they're looking at it strictly from a spreadsheet perspective rather than from a common sense, good management perspective. Just because that's what you think you can afford, you've got to start budgeting in a bigger way. You've got to change the way you think and say, what do I really need to make sure this is secure? If my children, my relatives, people I love were in that audience, what would I want to see? What's the number I want to see? It's not a scientific formula. It really is common sense. But again, common sense is not common sometimes. It has to be taught. But 1 for 50, that might be the minimum there, but it's certainly not good practice. It's not good practice at all. 1 for 30 is minimum. That's pretty much viewed as good standard operating procedure across the board. Now, here's the good news. You can use ad hoc security people. Bear with me as I explain this. Bartenders, waiters and waitresses can be eyes and ears and communication people for the security. They can be an extension of the security. Frankly, they are. Just they have to be trained. They should have some basic training, not as much as security gets, but they should have some basic training to understand what to look for and how to communicate effectively. So they can become ad hoc extensions of the security, which they're already working. You're just using their eyes and ears to help gather intel and pass that on. Generally, that's done very casually, and what we say to entertainment venues is make it more formal, because it's going to become a problem if you treat it as a casual thing. Well, our bartenders and waiters and waitresses already do that, but you do it in a very casual way, and that's going to come back to haunt you in a lawsuit. If you have a formal process, a basic training, which would take 40 minutes at the most for your paraprofessionals to be trained, and to put a process down on paper, that's going to protect you greatly from lawsuits. So, anything else, Matt?
Yes, we have a question from Atano who asks, does size, gender, physical ability matter when it comes to selecting security officers?
Great question. So here's something we talk about in our training, and I'll do it for you right now. Mary walks in, and Mary is 5'2". She weighs 125 pounds, and she is very good at reading. She's very good at reading fake licenses. She's very good at reading people. She has experience with gangs. And then Bob comes in, and Bob is 6'5". He's 300 pounds, and his only training he's ever had is installing carpet. Generally, what most people will do is hire Bob because they view security as a big guy kind of thing. And there's where the failure starts, right there. Because actually Mary has the experience. She's a Swiss Army knife for security management. She's got so many tools and so many skills. She's the one who's going to protect you from lawsuits and save you money. Bob, generally, because of his size and his lack of any experience, is going to be a deficit. Security is not about big people. I see this all the time when celebrities hire bodyguards. They want big people to intimidate people. It's not an issue of intimidation. Let me give you an example. We have, for the last 12 years, had a contract with the Navy Special Warfare Command. You would know that as Navy SEALs. The average Navy SEAL that I've met and dealt with is about 5'9", 160 pounds. They're not big guys, but you equip them and you send them out, and they'll take a country over in a weekend. And the thing is, for some reason, it comes from childhood. We believe that big guys have fighting ability or some kind of a special skill. And I will tell you, when I was doing executive protection back in the day when I was in my 20s and early 30s, big guys were easy to take down because all you had to do was slap them in the face, and they would just freeze up because they had never been in a fight. Most big guys have never been in a fight because there was always an assumption that they were tough and they had fighting skill because they were tall and big. Little guys were the problem. They were used to getting kicked around, and what happened was that that was a long, long night because they were tough. They had experience. And so it's, again, changing mentality, thinking of security and risk management as a management process within the company, and hiring people based on that. Most of the places we worked in, we have said to the security managers and executives, you don't have enough females on your staff. And they go, really? Oh, yeah. Because females can diffuse a situation many times where males cannot. And this is again, understanding security management, which is a whole different animal than just law enforcement or general management. So, any other questions? I got one up here on the board here from James Ray. Should I read this one, Matt?
Sure, yeah. Go for it.
At a club, a melee broke out. Instigators, I guess, of the melee unknown. Security or from outside company. Security used nightsticks and brass knuckles in crowd. Injuries were caused. It's believed that one security person fired shots from inside the club. No cameras. Can you analyze? Well, based on what you've given me, first of all, brass knuckles are pretty much illegal in most places in the country. Number two is nightsticks in most states in the United States require you to have a license. You have to have training and a license to use collapsible batons and nightsticks. That's another issue. But the real issue here is, and I'm going to focus on this, and if that's not correct, I'll ask you to refine your question. When you hire outside companies, you've created an absolute legal nightmare. Everybody listening to this, please listen if you forget everything else I told you. When you subcontract out security, you have immediately raised your liability to, not on a scale of 1 to 10, you've raised it to about 6,000. Here's the problem. People that provide security guards commercially are in a business that has a very low profit margin. And they are in the business of selling people for security services. They don't pay well. I mean, a good security person, a base pay for a good security person is $15 an hour plus benefits. And I'm hard-pressed to find a lot of companies that have that are paying that. Secondly, they don't do very good training with their people. And what happens is it's called downstream liability. At some point when you get sued, they're going to sue you based on the actions of those people. And what's the problem is that owners will say to me, well, I hired this outside company to do security. That's their responsibility. Oh, no. It's your responsibility. You had no control over those security people. You had no management control because you didn't sit down with the vendor, the outside security agency, and say, look, on paper, we're going to write a management plan. Our people supersede your managers inside our nightclub, inside our arena, at our state fair. You've got to sit down and work this out. This is, again, where legal counsel comes in to play in a big way, is putting on paper what the process is going to be in the chain of command. If you're going to let the contracted security people manage themselves, and your managers who run your company are not having a chain of command over them, you're creating a problem right there. And what you have here is basically bouncers. So, Matt, what do I call bouncers? What's another word for bouncers, Matt? You've done these enough with me.
I believe you call them thugs.
They're thugs. A bouncer, by their very name, means that they use physical aggression to handle people. Not verbal, not psychological. They use muscle. Well, if you're going to hire bouncers, when I hear that term, I always say to attorneys, you just won the case, because bouncers are thugs. They use physical aggression. That's not security management. Security professionals are not bouncers. And what you have here is, based on the information you've given me, James, you've got weapons. So you've got simple assault. You've got aggravated assault because there's weapons involved. You got someone firing a shot. So that's got to violate some kind of a weapons law. You've got no control. They have no control. They're using physical aggression, not management, to control this crowd. What a nightmare. I don't know if you work for this club or you have a pending litigation against them, but this is a no-brainer. It doesn't matter if there's no cameras or not. This is, you discover the process that was used to manage these people in discovery when you're doing your depositions. I mean, that's one thing, to those of you who are attorneys listening, one of the things that TASA likes about us is we write your deposition questions and tell you who to depose, and it's what they say in their depositions that tells you how they actually execute policy. Because policy is just words on paper. It's how you executed the policy that I'm concerned about, that I'm interested in, and you can hear from my voice that I'm very passionate about this, because no one should go to a bar or a nightclub or a state fair and be brutalized or hurt or injured because of unprofessional, lazy people. There's no excuse for it. Life is too short to have to worry about that kind of thing going on. And trust me, 20 years doing this, it's laziness and unprofessional behavior that causes these tragedies. And it's just, there's no excuse for it. In this situation, based on what you've told me, they had no control. It sounds like they were worse than the people that they were beating up. So hopefully that answers your question, James. Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions in the queue, so we should probably wrap things up. It is the top of the hour.
Okay. All right.
So let's wrap things up. And
thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you, everybody, for attending today. I thought the presentation of content was great, but more importantly, the Q&A session is always my favorite part of these presentations. So if you'd like to speak with Dale, not Jim, if you'd like to speak with Dale, please contact us here at 800-523-2319, and we'll get you in touch with him as quickly as possible. We will be sending out a link to the archived recording of this webinar later this afternoon. The archived recording will also be posted in the Knowledge Center of TASA's website. Our next client-focused webinar, Vertical Transportation, which will talk about escalators and elevators, will take place on June 22nd, 2010 at 2 p.m. And if you have any follow-up questions or comments, we always welcome your feedback. It makes these presentations better. Please get in touch with me, and I will work with you to make your comments a reality. But again, if you have a case or a project for Dale that you'd like to talk to him about, please let us know here at TASA. The phone number is on the screen, as is my email address, and I will send that out to everybody. So on behalf of the entire TASA Group, I'd like to thank you for your time and thank Dale for his presentation.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.